Hello and welcome to this Analyst Angle. I'm Rob Strechay, Managing Director and Principal Analyst with theCUBE Research. Really excited to be here, gearing up for KubeCon and CloudNativeCon North America in Atlanta. It's really going to be the epicenter of what's next in cloud native innovation. This year will be a significant turning point for the industry. We'll see AI and Kubernetes come together in ways that are reshaping the entire stack. Platform engineering is transforming developer productivity. Observability is becoming more intelligent and automated. Security is moving forward toward true zero trust architectures, and edge and hybrid clouds are unlocking entirely new deployment models. Over the next few minutes here, you'll get to hear us break down some of the trends, and we'll be talking to some leaders and users of this technology to really dive in deep and get a better understanding of what's going on. Right now, I'm excited to welcome Gaurav Saxena, who's the engineering leader for in automotive industry leader there. So Gaurav, really glad to have you on board. Exciting stuff going on. I know I'm going to get to see you pretty soon down in Atlanta, just in a few weeks here. So welcome on board.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me over here.
So as a platform engineering leader, how do you view the strategic value of things like OpenTelemetry and other open source projects in reducing fragmentation and building a unified internal developer platform? Is open source now, foundational, or is still supplementary to getting you into enterprise scale platforms and strategies for what you're doing with your platform team?
Yeah, open source is really paramount to our strategy here. We actually embrace open telemetry for all our observability needs. We are one of the biggest users of all the CNCF projects. You name it, Crossplane, Kubernetes, OpenTelemetry. The reason it helps in our strategy and vision is because we are also cloud agnostic in a way. So we can run our workloads in any of the hyperscale cloud providers, AWS, GCP, Azure, or our on-prem data centers. So having the unified open source tooling gives us the power to deploy it in any cloud provider that we want to do in. So that's our core heart of the strategy here.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot, and I think that to me is one of the great things about Kubernetes and KubeCon and CloudNativeCon. I've been arguing that it should be just CloudNativeCon. I mean, again, Kubernetes now being 11 years old, and some of the platforms and that have been out there are also over 10 years old now. I think it's a lot of fun. But like you said, let's dive in a little bit more, because I think you have a really unique perspective. And I think the world is hybrid or multi-cloud. And if they're not there yet, they're going there. And, platform teams must support everything from Kubernetes and serverless to legacy and SaaS. What are the biggest challenges in bringing together telemetry from these heterogeneous environments using OpenTel or OpenTelemetry, and how are you designing your platform architecture to really normalize and correlate that data?
Yeah, so OpenTelemetry, the way we are using in my industry is that we use all the three pillars: traces, logs, metrics. Profiling is right now in the special interest group. It's getting flushed out in terms of the spec, but it's coming out soon. We use all these three signals in a as much correlated way, so that when we have to do a troubleshooting for our any customer journey workflow, we are able to deep dive into the root cause analysis when at the time of either debugging a production incident or just trying to find out some analytics of how that user is interacting with our platform, right? Whether it's our own internal teams or it could be the driver of a vehicle, right? So we also ingest the data from a vehicle back to our cloud platform to analyze the sensors data of a vehicle, right? For our development teams to take a look at the data to do the predictive maintenance, that they can send the over-the-air updates commands back to vehicle, right? To make vehicle more function properly. And these end-to-end distributed tracing helps us to navigate the either the bottlenecks where if our systems are not performing, our internal systems are not performing well enough to make it better, or track the downloads that we are sending to the vehicle in an efficient way. So as you can imagine, we have millions of vehicles on the platform. How you manage them at scale to make sure that those vehicles are getting the proper updates. Those vehicles are sending the data that we need in order for us to make it reliable. And that's a distributed nature of our tracing plays into a very important role. So we have a lot of OpenTelemetry fleet of collectors that powers these applications. The challenge that is to answer your second point of question, that the challenge being here is that when we go and update our own Kubernetes-based infrastructure on OpenTelemetry collectors or operators, to update them at a scale like a fleet of collectors, making sure that we are still serving the traffic, still collecting the traffic without making it like a zero downtime, is a challenge, right? Because observability is a is not an afterthought; it's a first-class citizen. You want to make sure that when you are serving your live customers, any any real-time data that you want to take advantage of it, it gets into your system as fast as possible. So latency is also a challenge in how fast we can get the data from vehicles to our cloud platform. So the upgrade, maintenance, and the latency are the major challenges that we are trying to play and then make sure that our systems are performing better.
Right. I mean, I think what was great from what you were just describing, and it was like it's all of the above that you have to deal with. You have a lot of homegrown stuff, like you said, that you have the apps that are on phones for different information interacting with the car or interacting with service or support or what have you. So it's a very complicated set of systems, to put it mildly. But with open telemetry, and I think you kind of hit on this a little bit, driving kind of almost exponential data generation. How are you managing the cost implications in ingesting, storing, analyzing observability data at scale?
Yeah. So there are two parts to answer this question. One, we call it an operational data, and one is called analytics data, right? So there are two fragments of data here. To make sure that your costs are not hitting the roof and are manageable, you want to fan out these two separate principles, the operations data and analytics data, into separate buckets. So for example, if I'm serving an over-the-air deployment to vehicle, that's an operational data for me because I want to understand, is my update, the manifest file that I'm sending to vehicle, is it getting downloaded by vehicle at what increments of time? And also want the notification of that when that happens. So I want to track this as a real in as fast as possible, so that I can find out the issue faster than the user of a vehicle that either provides me the information, right? So that data gets sent into what we call the hot storage, meaning that's where we need the low latency as much possible. Now, when the download has been done, the end results of that we actually fan out by separate open telemetry collector and put into the cold storage, so we can run analytics 30 days from now, 60 days from now, because
So you're doing a you're sampling all the time, and what you're doing is data tiering off
yeah,
so that you're processing it all centrally, but you're basically tiering it to the right place for the right cost and right amount, I
correct,
guess.
correct.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense when you start to look at it. I think uh, it can get out of hand. I mean, I was talking on another podcast about this in the security realm and the security observability data, and just the old thing was, oh, we're just going to all shove it into one big data store and we'll keep it forever kind of thing. And then people are like, oh wow, our cloud bill is really expensive right now, and it's all just this legacy data. Do we tier it? Do we start? And this is stuff we've dealt with in quote unquote big data. You and I met up at the Databricks conference and had a chat there about this as well, which we'll we'll broach that in another analyst angle. But I think from this perspective, and when you look at platform engineering, and you look at it from a platform engineering standpoint, what do you see as kind of some of the best practices for deploying and managing OpenTelemetry collectors at scale? And how do you really ensure reliability and performance without overwhelming your infrastructure or your budget? Because I know you have to, it's a delicate balance.
Right. So fortunately, the open source community around the CNCF has a lot of tooling around managing your open telemetry collectors at scale. Now, we as an end user of that have a duty to make sure that our contributions that we do here for open source gets back into the community. So in this case of like managing the scale of the hotel collectors, it's still a largely unsolved problem in my point of view. When we're talking about running thousands of Kubernetes clusters, and not just in one region, the industry that I work for has a worldwide offsites. So we also have to take care of the data residency regulations, right? A GDPR compliance, and data from Europe can't come to US, right, and stuff like that. So how do you make sure that not only you are managing the collectors at scale, but also making sure that data has a proper access and a proper compliance point of view, and it's also secured in a way. So the open telemetry collector is just one piece of the puzzle. How do you deploy your collectors in those regions to make sure that they have no vulnerabilities? Because think about that, the automotive, the car that you're deploying to these can't run an unsecured software. If you talked about in your opening sentences about like a zero trust, isn't it? So
Right.
how do you make sure that your collector has authenticated with the right set of vehicles that you're trying to do it? How can you make sure that when you do upgrade, there is no malicious code that gets inserted either at the time of deployment or at the time of building that image itself? So how do you say that? How can you do what we call software supply chain security in terms of provenance? Where did that image came from? What are the dependencies it came from? Can we attest that? Is there a Git commit? Who signed that commit? And when we as an end user do it, are we doing the right tag and cryptographic sign it before we deploy to the one of those regions of those collectors where it's responsible for collecting the data from vehicles, right? Now, in terms of, as you can see, there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot of operational burden workload, right? The way to do that is to have a right set of monitoring tools. So when we upgrade our collector, we do it like, let's say, a batch of collectors at a time for that geographic region, right? We have a whole run book around that. If the things are not going well, we have to run book to roll it back to the old version of the collector. Because right now, we have to also play with the catch up of the open telemetry collector versions because they get released every 2 weeks. And we want to take a look at its release notes, what features we are trying to inculcate from that upstream to our version of the to our version of the hotel collector, and make sure that it is still compatible with your current set of users, right? So that's a challenge. Uh, Fortunately, here the Kubernetes operators for hotel collector plays a very important role. It's basically a tooling that helps you to deploy that without much looking at the source code itself. So there's some automation done by the community itself, by the CNCF, and we also have our own automation on top of that that does the rollout in a manner.
Yeah, no, I think that's the key, right? Is being able to bring all together your stuff with the open source and bring it back up into up into the main branches as being part of that community. I think, but one of the things, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, is you know how do you create a shared incentive between development teams and the platform engineering team so that open telemetry is implemented in a way that supports both innovation and that operational excellence that you have to have for your customers.
Yeah, so, and I mean, we really imbibe on this inner source contributions. So we, as a platform engineers, are a little bit far away from the end customers, because we are the infrastructure team that's helping these applications to use our tooling to do the job that they are tasked with, which is, let's say, OTA deployments, or get me data from vehicles so that I can use that data to build my machine learning models, to do some analysis of the data set, and then deploy that model back to vehicle. So my part of the role is basically to provide that infrastructure, to cater towards both the AI side of ML side of applications, as well as getting the telemetry data from vehicles. To answer specific to your question, the inner source contribution, we as a platform team work with our end users, which is our internal teams, to understand their use cases and provide the right amount of abstraction, right amount of interfaces that they need, and they should not be getting bogged down by the internals of platform infrastructure. Meaning, as if I'm an application developer, I have a business goal of deploying this application to the vehicle that can fetch me data from these many sensors. As a service developer, I should not be worried about how my application is getting deployed, because that's a part of concern of operations. If I have to do that, then I'm basically spending my time on my CI/CD builds, operations, observability. That does not really move the needle for the business logic, right? So my part of role is basically to work with those service teams to understand their use cases and provide them the guidance for the right set of interfaces that I can expose from my platform services, so they can use that to deploy wherever their workloads are or have the KPIs for. So as a developer, I don't need to worry about, am I deploying in my AWS region or GCP region? I only care about, here's my chart limits for my request, CPU, memory. I need an ingress, I need a database. Platform team, you tell me where is the right side of both from the FinOps perspective as well as from the perspective of which region has more latency sensitive applications. You figure that out and deploy the right set of infrastructure to cater towards that need. And that's where we bring in the value.
Yeah, no, I think that to me makes a lot of sense. I think again, when you start to look at it, it's about servicing, the end customer, even though you are, like you said, a little bit further removed from that. You're still pretty plugged in. I mean, you're touching their devices and all of that stuff with all of this telemetry, so that you can get that information back and help them have a good, customer experience or CX from that perspective. But that also brings me, because I think I can see where you're going with this, and I can think towards what it would be. But how are you measuring the impact of observability on developer experience, deployment velocity, and just the overall platform ROI, as it might be?
Yeah, great question. I'll divide this into two parts. One being, let's say you are a driver of the vehicle that I help in producing it, right? How satisfied your driving experience has been. Like, for example, if I am doing an OTA update to your vehicle, has it improved your driving experience, right? How do we measure that? That's one side of equation. Second side of equation is the internal teams that we help to use our services for their workloads. How do we measure their developer productivity or developer experience? So there are two sides of broadly classified in terms of the experience. The first part of the vehicle side, we actually measure through, since we have millions of vehicles on the platform, we measure in terms of our deployment times, our release times of those OTA software to vehicles itself. So we track for each of the manifests that we ask users to download in their vehicles. We keep a track of when they started when the vehicle got connected, because vehicles are a moving target, right? Sometimes it could be in the garage where there is no signal to receive the manifest. It may have received the partial manifest, but it has stopped downloading because it's no more connected to the platform. So making sure that the observability is providing you all that nuances around where when it started, why it stopped, as an example. Can we get those events so that we can time our OTA deliverables for that particular vehicle at a time based on their usage driving pattern, as an example, right? So we get that data through all of our observability needs. In terms of measuring the developer productivity, we measure through in terms of for our own the same hotel collector, the same observability stack is actually checking your CI/CD pipelines. So, for example, for that particular software release, what was the build time? Where we spend more time, as an example? Is that build was cryptographically signed? Did we sign all the measures? Did we run all the security scans, like or license checks? Because we run open source software cockpit, so we should make sure that our license checks are still in compliance, right?
Right.
And before we then push it out to the artifactory, before the vehicles can pull the image from there. So we measure for each of those steps the latency and the request volume, so that we have all the data for the betterment of next set of releases to make our software much better the next time when we have to do the deployment.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think to that point, I think again, like you said, you have to be in compliance. I've built many different SaaS-based platforms and on-prem platforms using software that's open source, and you have to be within compliance of all those licenses to be honest. And I think again, the fact that you're contributing back is great too. But so kind of like final thoughts here. We're both going to be in Atlanta. I'm excited to be there. I think I mean, from what I'm hearing, the crowd is going to probably be the largest that they've ever had. It'll be interesting. Usually they get larger crowds in Europe than they do in North America, but I know a lot of people who are going to this one, and I'm excited for it, to put it mildly. What are you looking forward to? Because I know you're doing a panel, you're doing a couple talks there. You're going to be a busy guy, to put it mildly. So what are you looking forward to in Atlanta?
I'm mostly the use cases that I'm working towards today, and it's right now not in production, but hopefully one soon be, is around the edge IoT, right? So I talked about so far is about the deployments from cloud to device and then getting the data from device to cloud, right? The bidirectional workflow. What if we can move some of these workloads at the edge of vehicle, right?
Right.
That's where the power of the newest AI models can help us, right? As close as the vehicle, when you are doing the transactions, you can reduce the dependencies from so many network hops. How do we do that in the native Kubernetes way is what I'm mostly interested at getting out of the value while attending those conference presentations by various members of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation committee members.
Yeah, and I think that's the great thing. And I did a panel in London at the European one, even though it was called EU, even though it was in the UK, and that was a whole bane of existence or constraint there. But I think it was a great time, and I think again it's great having you on, Gaurav. Thanks for coming on board, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
And thank you for joining us. And we'll see you soon in Atlanta for KubeCon CloudNativeCon North America on theCUBE, the leader in tech analysis and news.